Thanks for joining us as we continue on our series on the pursuit of happiness, on those elements of our lives that give us fulfillment and joy. Okay, so sometimes when I talk, I give you answers, or at least I try to, and sometimes I leave you with more questions. Today may be in the B category, and that's good because that means that for our discussion on Wednesday, we'll have some more of this to unpack. And it's never bad to leave folks with things to think about and kind of noodle out on their own. So this may be one of those types of talks. So my focus today is on our relationship between our spirituality and our actions. Our faith traditions teach us, and I think that experience shows us, that our spiritual walk as it deepens leads us invariably into a life of action. This relationship, this synchronicity, is if not the route to our deeper happiness as spiritual beings having a very human experience. I mean, we are incarnate, which means that we act. But we have to ask ourselves, what is the source of that action? What is the stream that feeds that action? And my premise is, the closer our spiritual journey does that, the more whole we are and the happier we are. So for the next few minutes, I want to talk about how true that is for us, what that relationship might look like, and what this action that results might look like. So as I sit here in the age of COVID-19, it seems like any discussion of a life of action seems a bit anomalous and maybe out of place. So many of us are remaining at home as we isolate to slow the spread of the virus. As I sit here in my office, in my house, my choices for activity can seem limited. Like you, I'm not going out as I did before, and most of us are the same, especially with the virus spiking as it's recently been doing. However, when we shift our focus from all the things that we no longer can do to look at the vast opportunities for action and involvement that remain, our worldview opens up. We still have the opportunity to show up, to act in the world however we choose to do so. We may need to be a little more creative about how we do that, but we still have the opportunity. Perhaps you've heard me speak in the past about my belief that as our spiritual journey continues and our wisdom grows, the path that we can take becomes more narrow. It's a little bit ironic to think of your worldview opening and your choices narrowing, but I think that's what happens. And maybe in your experience, that is what happens as well. Our choices seem more circumscribed, not because our vision is more constricted, but because it is wider. We see more clearly what is the right thing to do, the compassionate and loving thing to do. And we no longer have the option to say, no, I think I'll pay attention to that next week. I'm just not interested. I think we move more toward a life of involvement and connection with each other as our spiritual walk deepens. In his book, The Active Life, Parker Palmer writes, "To be alive is to act. The capacity to act is the most obvious difference between the quick and the dead, but action is more than movement. It is movement that involves expression, discovery, reformation of ourselves and our world." He writes, "I understand action to be any way that we can co-create reality with other beings and with the spirit. As we act, we not only express what is in us and help give shape to the world, we also receive what is outside us, and we reshape our inner selves. When we act, the world acts back, and we and the world are co-created." So what does this mean? It means there's a dialogue. It means that the world and creation is not something we act upon. It is something that we act with. And when we act consistent with our inner guidance, consistent with our inner wisdom, consistent with the holy that is at the essence in each of us, we are changed. And creation is changed when we engage together. Now, what he's talking about is intentional action. It's not simply continual movement, which we sometimes mistake for meaningful action. It's action that arises from our connection with spirit and our connection with each other from our willingness to be that channel for the love of God in this world. Father Richard Rohr writes, "We need both compassionate action and contemplative practice for the spiritual journey." He writes that he started the Center for Action and Contemplation back in the mid-'80s, I think it was '86, and he has said that the important word in that title is not action or contemplation, but and. It's the word that joins the two. They are necessary complements of each other, the yin and the yang of spiritual wholeness. You can't have one without the other. Our deepening spiritual life so profoundly informs the actions we take. It is their true north. We often like just being busy. For many, it surrounds us with an aura of being important and being in demand. I can't get back to you. I'll have to call you next week. I'm so busy. How are you doing? Oh my God, I've been so busy. It's a call to our ego, but it isn't the source of meaningful, loving action. It can be very seductive, however, as we know. Right action, loving action, springs from a place of, if I can call it this, non-duality, of knowing that we are connected. And when I lift you up, I invariably lift myself up as well. All of us are lifted up. When we act from this place of oneness, we act in the flow of that divine love that created us, free from our ego driving the train. If we are looking for a guide to help us discern the right action, to see our next step, I cannot think of a better one. And it doesn't matter the process whereby this happens. It's different for each of us. Sometimes we're going to start with a deepening contemplative practice, and our expanding understanding of the oneness at our center leads us into lives of compassionate service. In a sense, it drives us out the door, because all of a sudden we wake up and we realize we have no choice. We respond to the imperative to give life to our new understandings, to act out of what we have come to know at our very core. This is the path narrowing. On the other hand, we may see a need and we first jump in, start addressing the injustices we see, or the inequalities we see, or the need we see, and our contemplative life grows when we take the time to reflect on what we've seen, what we've done, people we've met, what we along with others have worked to accomplish. We may make the connections later. There's no right way. We each find the path that leads us to this wholeness. At some point, we start to live from this connection. Parker Palmer tells the story of a friend of his who'd worked all his life for social justice. He lived in voluntary poverty, below the tax level, giving what would otherwise have gone to taxes to organizations working for peace and human dignity. His reach has been small. We've probably never heard his name. He works in his community lovingly and diligently. And there are folks who have said he has not been all that effective. He never got his 15 minutes on CNN. He never achieved what we might regard as big results. When asked if he was concerned about this, he said, "I never worry about being effective. I worry about being faithful." I just love that. I never worry about being effective. I worry about being faithful. And we might ask, faithful to what? I think he meant faithful to the truth of the love that is at his source, to the spirit that is calling him to act. He didn't worry about his impact. He worried about his motive. Our faith traditions teach us that contemplation and action feed each other, and that a living and a whole life involves both. One must feed the other. One of the best known passages in the Christian scriptures is from the book of James, where the author wrote, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but do not have works? Can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill,' and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that?" So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. Our inner life fuels how we show up. Faith, as this passage says, without the works that go with it, is meaningless. Our wholeness results when each complements the other. When you look at the life of Jesus through his short ministry, you see a focus on what? On healing and on teaching. What did he teach? He didn't teach what his followers should believe, not even how they should regard him. He taught how they should live, how they should treat each other, how they should heal each other and lift each other up, how they should work together to provide a community of justice and equity and peace. He taught a life that was animated by faith in the source of that love. But it didn't stop there. He gave feet to it. And he said, this is how you must live. This is what you must do. And this is the community that could result from it. This love comes alive when we take action, when we live it, and when we live from it. As author Mark Nepo writes, in the end, it is not enough to think what we know. We must live it. For only by living it can love show itself as the greatest principle. Love is a dynamic. It is a relationship. It flowers when we put feet to it. This is true for those whom our actions touch, and it's also true for ourselves. When we act from this place, it enlightens us as well. As Parker Palmer said above, we not only express what is in us and help give shape to the world, we also receive what is outside us, and we reshape our inner selves. When we act from that center of love that is at our core, the world acts back and reshapes us and deepens and awakens us. We are in dialogue, if you will, with creation, opening ourselves to be changed as we co-create a better world. This element is missing when we act from our sense of ego, our sense of what's in it for me. We may still do good, but we sacrifice the deeper awakening we would experience if we could put our ego aside. We miss the joy that comes from experiencing our work as the outer expression of that inner wholeness. Father Thomas Keating wrote, "The effectiveness of action depends on the source from which it springs. If it is coming out of the false self with its shadow side, it is severely limited. If it's coming out of a person who is immersed in God, it is extremely effective. The contemplative state brings Christ into the world." Thomas Keating is the Christian mystic who really generated the notion in the Christian tradition of contemplative prayer. It's kind of an adaptation in the Christian tradition of the Eastern meditative practices, and it's a wonderful way to focus your mind and your heart and develop that inner awakening. What he meant is that the source of our action matters. He invites us to examine our motivations when we act in the world and to stay true to that inner voice that is always calling us to be the light of the world that we are, to use his Christian imagery to shine that Christ energy that is there in each of us and bring Christ into the world through us. So as I was continuing to think about this topic, it struck me that this message was also deeply ingrained in another one of my favorite scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita, that I've talked about before. Many of you may remember that Mahatma Gandhi was a lifelong student of the Gita, seeing it as wisdom teaching for all those who wish to experience the holy in this life while living out a life of action and involvement. He summarized the Gita's teaching in the phrase nishkama karma, or selfless action. Let's think about that. Selfless action. So what is that? For Gandhi, it was action free from selfish desires or motives, what we might call ego. He's not saying that our work is free of all desire, because how dry would life be if we didn't have desire, if we didn't have passion? Our human drive is necessary. Where would we be without the passion that drives so much of what we do and what we love? It drove a great deal of his work. But what he was cautioning against, and what he teaches the Gita cautions against, is selfish desire or desire driven by attachment. This is a primary teaching of the Gita, that our motives matter so profoundly. Again, it is the marriage of action and contemplation. Our motives matter. You'll remember that verse in the Gita in which the Lord Krishna tells the hero Arjuna, the warrior, that he must act, even though when he's fainting with fear. He does not want to go into battle and kill his relatives. He sinks to the ground and he says, I cannot do it. The Lord Krishna tells him that he must. He must act because it is his dharma to do that. And yet at the same time, he must renounce the fruits of his actions. His focus must be on the actions themselves, and he must do them because they are his to do. He must do them for the right reason, and he must renounce the outcome. In a sense, it struck me, and I'd like to hear what you think, this is the same as the comment of Parker Palmer's friend, that he didn't worry about being effective, he didn't worry about the outcome, but he worried about being faithful. He focused on being true to the voice of spirit that animated him. The results were not in his hands, but the work is. Gandhi used the notion of detachment and the word detachment. It doesn't mean disinterest, but it does involve removing your focus from the outcome. He put it this way: by detachment, I mean that you must not worry whether the desired result flows from your action or not, as long as your motive is pure, your means correct. Really, it means that things will come out right in the end if you take care of the means and leave the rest to him. Okay, let's just think about that. I cannot imagine a more liberating philosophy. We do what is ours to do, what our inner wisdom calls us to do, and we release the outcome. How many of the tasks in your life, how many of the tasks in my life do I do solely with a view on the outcome? As a lawyer, when I get ready for a hearing, it's because I want to win. If you're an athlete and you're getting ready for a competition, you do it because you want to be the first one to break the tape. But what happens if you're not? What happens if you lose? What happens if you in your own mind fall short? We judge the outcome. We diminish the value of the joy and the commitment and the drive that we brought to the task. We regard ourselves perhaps as failures, but that's not the case. When we do what is ours to do, what our inner nature calls us to do, and we release the result, there is no failure, there is no judgment. We don't know how events are going to unfold in the end, and how they do is not in our hands. Our job is to act from that place of love, from the source that created and sustains us, and that is the source of our drive. That is the source of our energy and our joy and our commitment. When we can do that, we become more fully engaged, happier, and more fully alive. As spiritual beings having a very human experience, our challenge is to maintain that harmony between our inner life, our spiritual walk, our understanding of what spirit is calling us to do, and the actions that we take in this world. Our daily journey is how we live that relationship, how we do that, employing both aspects of action and contemplation. So let's think about that. And let's unpack on Wednesday some more of this wisdom. I'd like to close my talk with a reading by Alison Leverett. Thanks for listening.
Good morning. This reading is a passage from The Active Life by Parker Palmer. The core message of all the great spiritual traditions is, be not afraid. Rather, be confident that life is good and trustworthy. In this light, the great failure is not that of leading a full and vital active life with all the mistakes and suffering such a life will bring, along with its joys. Instead, the failure is to withdraw fearfully from the place to which one is called, to squander the most precious of all our birthrights, the experience of aliveness itself.
Thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in learning more about One World Spiritual Center, please visit us at www.oneworldspiritualcenter.net. Thanks so much.